According to Wikipedia, suicide is among the 3 leading causes of death in those aged 15 to 44 years. Attempted suicides are up to 20 times more frequent than completed ones. Differences in suicide rates between genders are prominent, with males committing suicide at a higher rate in almost every country in the world. Suicide is real. Despite the fact that it's one of the leading causes of death in the world, there are still so many misconceptions that stigmatize it. And today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the suicide myths and facts, and also how you can actually really prevent suicide. So stay tuned to the very end of this episode. Welcome to Healthy Minds Talk, a podcast created to help you grow, bring awareness to mental health, and also remind you that it's not all in your head. There's hope, even when your brain tells you there isn't. I'm Praise Victor, and I remain your host on this show. So I'm just going to be diving right into the suicide myths, and the first one I want to talk about is a phrase, or it's something that is so common, like you hear this almost all the time when news about someone dying by suicide comes out, and they always say that the myth I want to talk about is that suicide is selfish. Now, most people are of the idea that when someone dies by suicide, they're selfish. They're always like, didn't he or she think of their friends and family members? Like, why would they just decide to go forever without putting them into consideration? Now, considering the pain, the guilt, and the shock that people feel when they lose their loved ones by suicide, I'll say that it's really understandable. But at the same time, I'll also say that blaming the dead person for dying by suicide is kind of inconsiderate. Thinking suicide is selfish comes from a place of ignorance and misunderstanding of the hopelessness that the suicidal person felt, the burden the person felt of feeling like a burden to everyone else, misunderstanding of the fact that the suicidal person saw death as an escape from the intense emotional pain they felt, misunderstanding of the fact that they preferred death to life, misunderstanding of the desperation the person had to feel relief. Now, while I don't support suicide, and it will sound like I really don't support suicide, but then I do understand what it feels like to be suicidal, and trust me when I tell you that we do think about our family and our friends before attempting suicide. But the thing is, at that point in time, when the suicidal thoughts are really intense, we see it as doing them a favor because we think they'll be better off without us. Now, no matter how ridiculous that sounds to you, suicidal people actually do think that their loved ones will be better off without them. And the thing is, people struggling with suicidal thoughts do not think the way you're currently thinking right now. Even Stephen Fry, he said it in an interview, and he agreed that depression and suicidal ideation don't make you think logically or make you automatically confide in your friends and family about what you're struggling with. So instead of concluding that suicide is selfish, you need to look at suicide from the perspective of the mental struggle, the hopelessness, and the desperation that the suicidal person felt, and sympathize with that. And the second myth that people always encourage to stigmatize suicide is that talking about suicide will encourage it. Now, it's a fact that talking about suicide will not encourage suicide. Instead, it creates more awareness about suicide and also how to help. And this is even one of the reasons why this podcast exists, to create mental health awareness and to talk about the difficult topics and codes that have been stigmatized by society. Talking about suicide makes suicidal people feel more comfortable to open up and be honest about their struggles. So yes, it's okay to talk about depression, it's okay to talk about anxiety, it's okay to talk about panic attacks, ADHD, and whatever other mental illnesses there are that people are really struggling with. It's okay to also talk about having passive suicidal thoughts when you start feeling hopeless about life. Even Rory O'Connor, he's a professor of health psychology at Glasgow University, and he said that Evidence shows asking someone if they're suicidal can actually protect them. They feel listened to and hopefully less trapped. Their feelings are validated and they know that someone cares about them. Reaching out can save a life. So you see, it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to talk about mental health, mental illnesses, suicide, someone having suicidal thoughts. It's okay to talk about all of that. If we can talk about physical illnesses, mental illnesses shouldn't be any different. Now, another myth people like to promote, or will I say advocate for or publicize, is that suicide happens without warning. Now, there's no doubt, I wouldn't even lie about this, that news about someone dying by suicide is very shocking, but that doesn't mean that there weren't any warning signs from the person. Because you can't tell me that you saw an acquaintance or an old friend post about giving up on life and weeks later you hear news of their death by suicide, and then you're like, how? Oh my God, I wish I knew. There weren't any signs. Sis, bro, whatever gender you classify as, there were signs. Like, you don't expect people struggling with suicidal thoughts to write it on a placard or post it everywhere. I talked about it last week and also 2 weeks ago on this podcast that there are so many warning signs to look out for in their conversations, in their behavior, and also in their mood. Like them talking about hating their existence, them feeling hopeless or trapped, withdrawing from their friends and family, having overly frequent mood swings, or even them calling you all of a sudden out of the blues and then they just start thanking you excessively, and then at the end of it all they say goodbye. That's really weird. So there are always signs, there are always warning signs of suicide. You just need to be aware of them. Another myth that people relate to suicide is that people who talk about suicide are attention seeking and they won't go through with it. They believe that, if someone maybe posts about them having suicidal thoughts, them thinking of dying or thinking of killing themselves, that they're just looking for attention, that they're just bored and lonely and they just want someone to talk to them, or they're just looking for attention basically. And people feel like that. Now, due to the stigma that's associated with suicide and mental health issues in general, people do doubt the authenticity of those opening up about their struggles. Some people see the warning signs of suicide and depression as laziness or as a Gen Z trend, which is so weird. But the truth is that it's not. Suicide, depression, mental illnesses, they are not a trend. They are real struggles. It's so much more bigger than what you think. Now, while you see suicide, or you see someone talking about their suicidal thoughts, while you see that as attention seeking, they are actually crying out for help. You need to understand that mental health issues are to be taken seriously, even if you don't believe them because you don't think someone like that should be struggling with their mental health. You still need to be there for them. Listen to them. Do not jump to conclusions because of what you've heard from others. Suicidal ideation, or talking about suicide, talking about suicidal thoughts, or struggles with depression and anxiety and mental health and all of that, it's not attention seeking. It's a loud cry for help. Another myth associated with suicide is that all suicidal people are mentally ill. Now, this misconception, obviously it's a misconception, so it's very wrong, because not all suicidal people are mentally ill. Lifestyle changes like a breakup, job loss, financial debts, sexual abuse, and even having a very low self-esteem can trigger suicidal thoughts. So you shouldn't say that just because someone doesn't have a mental illness that they can't die by suicide. They can. You need to delete that misconception from your head with immediate effect, because that limits, your ability to see someone's warning signs. You just feel like, oh, they're just, in their feelings, like it's probably just a phase. You need to just, please, it's not only people that struggle with or that are mentally ill that, have suicidal thoughts. It can happen to anyone. So you just need to be sympathetic and understand. Another myth that people talk about is that there's nothing you can do when a suicidal person has decided to take their life, that suicide can't be prevented. But the truth is, while suicide is very unpredictable, you can prevent it. Even after they've talked about their plan and they've shown persistence in ending it all and taking their life, you can still prevent suicide. Which leads me to the next thing I want to talk about, which is how to prevent suicide. So the first thing I would say is normalize talking about mental health. Obviously, you need to educate yourself about mental health and mental illnesses, because they are two different things. So I just had to specify. You need to educate yourself about mental health and mental illnesses. Now, even though where I am, I'm based in Nigeria right now, and even though mental health is not taught in schools, I don't know about your location, but even though it's not taught in schools, you need to read books, listen to podcasts, follow social media accounts that advocate for mental health. Just make sure that you're constantly informed about it, and do this not just for anyone else, but also for yourself first, because just like everyone else, you do have mental health. So choose not to stay ignorant in this day and age about, mental health. And another thing that can be done to prevent suicide is easy access to mental health and physical health care. Now, having easy access to mental health care should be a norm. Like, it should be a normal thing that I should have a therapist. It's not just when you're struggling with suicidal thoughts that you're supposed to go for therapy. Therapy should be affordable for everyone. It's not, going for therapy or going to therapy is not something that's tragic. It's not always a sign that there's something wrong with your mental health. It's not a sign that you're crazy or you're losing your mind. And it doesn't always have to be the last resort. It's not until you're at rock bottom or you're at the edge of everything else that you decide that, okay, I need to go for therapy. No, therapy should be a normal thing. Going to therapy should be a normal thing, because it's an effective way to improve your mental health. So yes, you should have easy access to mental health care. Another thing you can do to prevent suicide is to learn healthy coping skills like journaling, meditation, knowing your triggers, so it's self-awareness, exercising, and also emotional regulation. I've talked about that on this podcast. You can check out the past episodes for that. You should also be connected to, family, friends, and also your community, whether that's your faith-based community, as a Christian. Just make sure that you have a stable support system. Another thing that can be done to prevent suicide is having a well-structured home and a learning environment, because the home should actually be one of the first places that mental health is discussed. From a young age, you need to teach your children about their self-worth, about how to communicate, about how to, just teach them healthy coping skills. And it's not only about what you teach them, it's also about what they see you do at home. So you also have to, work on yourself, improve your mental health. You also have to portray the right values, the right way to deal with tough situations and all of that, because one of the best ways, or one of the most common ways that children do learn, is not just about what you tell them to do, but it's about what they see you do. So yeah, you should also be mindful of that. If you're currently a parent, or you're you have a baby bump and you're expecting a baby soon, just make sure that your kids are loved and they feel like they belong. Don't compare them to other kids or dismiss their emotional needs. It always starts from the home. While there are also other factors that do contribute to the declining of someone's mental health, like society as a whole, maybe being bullied at school and all of that, it still always does start from the home. Another thing you can do to prevent suicide, now this is if the person has been open to you and if they've talked about their suicidal thoughts, you should actually restrict access. I think I talked about this last week. You should restrict access to means of suicide, whether that's taking harmful objects like pills, ropes, knives, guns, and other whatsoever lethal weapon it is that, can be used to die by suicide, should actually be kept very far away from them. And I think this is the last thing that you can do, is to take warning signs and, suicide threats. I don't know if I'll call them threats, but just take warning signs and threats very seriously, so that you won't be that person that would see someone post about, their struggles with mental health, and then you ignore that, and then weeks later you hear that they attempted suicide or they died by suicide, and then you're like, oh my God, I never knew they were struggling. They showed a warning sign, but you were either ignorant of that, or I don't know. Just make sure that you do take the warning signs seriously, and also the threats, if they post on their social media accounts that goodbye, thank you for all you guys have done, whatever seems off to you, you just need to reach out and just check up on them. I talked about it last week, how you can help a loved one that's struggling with suicidal thoughts. So if you haven't listened to that episode yet, you should definitely check it out. We've come to the very end of today's episode and the end of the suicide prevention series, but that doesn't mean that suicide prevention is over. Every day should be a suicide prevention day. And what do I mean? Be kind to everyone, check up on people, compliment them, and let them know how much you appreciate their existence in your life. Treat other people the way you'd love to be treated. And thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the podcast. If you haven't subscribed yet, or if you're new here, please subscribe on the podcasting platform you're using to listen, and also check out the past episodes. I'm really sure they'd be helpful and you love them. Now, before I go, I'd also love for you to follow me on my social media accounts. The links are in the description, and I will see you next Monday.